What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, aka Smooth as Butter, aka Babyface Ron, aka Old Spice. And today we're going to talk about my top 5 players skyrocketing up my rookie rankings. And they're not moving up there because, I'm kind of, just becoming bigger fans of certain players, but because every 2 weeks I got to update my prospect grades where they take into account, draft capital and athletic measurements. And these are all very fluid right now where we're, in early April. So I'm using projected draft capital from, a website called Grind the Mocks, where they take, thousands of mock drafts done by like analysts and experts, and they compile like ADPs for each player. So 1 week a player might be, second round pick, 35. Another, he might be first round pick 15. And that causes huge swings in the rankings. So I wanted to kind of come out here and communicate the swings that I'm seeing on the back end to you guys. Now we have other things coming in, like, some athletic measurements from pro days and some post-combine updates to film grades. So a lot of things in the air right now. So kind of just want to communicate to you guys what I'm seeing on the back end. So we're going to get into that in a second. Before we do, if you enjoyed this video at any point in time, make sure you go down below, leave a like. The YouTube algorithm is doing your boy dirty right now. We took a little bit of a break. We're not like consistently in there yet. So any likes, any, engagement in the comments goes a long, long way for the channel. Also, make sure you subscribe. And as always, let's go.
Thirsty, thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm critical. My nitty bag.
All right, so this first one, I almost debated making an entire video just for Kenneth Walker, and I'm really excited to talk about him. At first, in this draft process, I wasn't a massive fan of him. He is 211 pounds. He's undersized. He doesn't catch passes. But he just got the biggest upgrade of this entire bunch by far, and it completely came out of left field. The other day, Graham Barfield, and we'll get into why Graham Barfield is so important in a second, but he tweeted this out. He said, Kenneth Walker is the epitome of a yards created standout. Walker's yards created per carry, 5.86, is 91st percentile and puts him among some amazing prospects like Zeke, Fournette, and Kamara. I think he was a fluid pass catcher on limited reps as well. He's RB1 overhaul. I personally would consider Graham Barfield kind of like an RB guru. He has a metric called yards created, and it's easily one of the most predictive metrics out there. It's defined, yards created per attempt, as the amount of yards a running back gains on their own after they reach the second level past the offensive line's blocking. It's pretty much, on the very basic level, how much yards are you creating independent of, your outside variables. And it's easily one of the most predictive running back stats that I have in my model. It is really, really solid. It has, it kind of called Joe Mixon. It kind of called, I'm trying to think of the other guys, but like Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon. I know Alvin Kamara was really high in there. So it's really good at kind of finding these guys that are just really good running backs in the NFL. The only bad thing about Graham Barfield's yards created is that it takes so long for him to chart. He has to sit down and watch every single carry and chart every single, rush in terms of how many yards are they creating, which takes a really long time. So he doesn't end up releasing yards created stats for these running backs until a week or two after the NFL draft. So we're kind of left in the dark until then. That's why it's so huge that he pretty much gave the public, a look at Kenneth Walker's yards created, a number we didn't think we were going to have for, another 6 weeks. So that's really huge for Kenneth Walker, especially considering how good a 5.86 is. It is 7th among the 65 running backs in my database in terms of yards created data. It's wild. He is, the prince who was promised in terms of the film grinder saying he is the best pure rusher in this class. He is that guy. And the model has a yards created threshold that's, I think, like somewhere in the 5.5 range. And if a running back hits that threshold, then they get a multiplier on their final grade. And Kenneth Walker hits that threshold, and this is him among the other round 2 backs that also hit that yards created threshold. Right now, he's projected on Grind the Mocks to go round 2, pick 56. The only other round 2 running backs that hit that yards created threshold, Joe Mixon, Javonte Williams, Dalvin Cook. It's a really strong list. And after, shoving that into the model, his prospect grade goes from a 6.86 as a silver, which hit top 12 seasons at a 25% rate, to a gold, which hit top 12 seasons at a 50% rate. The problem is that his RS grade goes to 7.99 after the multiplier. For all the Kenneth Walker stands out there, the very tough part is that elite for running backs is 8. He is literally the highest gold running back in my database. So it becomes kind of a predicament where he is 0.01 off from being elite, which brings him from a 50% hit rate bucket to a 80% hit rate bucket. So it's a little bit tough. I think for now I'll be treating him as kind of like a fringe elite. I won't treat him as like a Breece Hall, but he is to me in a tier of, a tier by himself as that RB2. I like him in that 106 to 107 range. I will say if he gets first round draft capital, he will be elite very easily. Probably even, high end elite in like the same tier as Breece Hall if he goes, especially if he goes ahead of Breece Hall and Breece Hall stays in the second round. So he still has a pathway to elite, but for now, very, very high end gold. He gets a huge upgrade from silver to gold. So really, really strong data point for Kenneth Walker. If any of you guys out there are Kenneth Walker guys, you can hang your hat on his yards created in terms of having concrete data that he is a very, very good rusher outside of, any subjective film. Next up, we have Garrett Wilson, who got a really juicy draft capital boost in the most recent, Grind the Mocks update. He went from 15th overall pick to the 10th overall pick, which is big because my model gives wide receivers drafted inside of the top 10 a nice boost, right? Guys that get drafted top 10, like we had Waddle and Devonta Smith last year. In theory, these guys, one, they look really, really good on tape for a team to want to invest that draft capital in them. And then secondly, any wide receiver taken in the top 10 are going to get, every opportunity to succeed. None of these, GMs and stuff want to, none of them want to look bad because they drafted a wide receiver early and like he didn't pan out. Everybody wants Jamar Chase. So if you draft somebody in the top 10, that leads to more opportunities, more draft capital invested. It's pretty straightforward. So he goes from a gold with an 8.14 grade, which is a really strong gold, by the way, which hit top 24 seasons 45% of the time, to an 8.83 elite grade, which puts him in the 85% hit rate bucket in terms of top 24 season. That's really good. That's a very massive jump in terms of hit rate from 45% to 85% just off of, being drafted in the top 10. And when it comes to Garrett Wilson, with that extra bump up, I really like what he looks like on paper. He is this smooth operator. His analytics are solid, but I think his biggest, feather in his cap is that the film community loves him. That's why I have him as my wide receiver 2 right now. Lane Zierlein, who's NFL.com's leading draft analyst, has him tied for wide receiver 1 in this class. He's projected to go top 10, which means he's going to be the first wide receiver off the board in the NFL. So we have, 2, film-based people that have him pretty much as the best wide receiver in this class. And I think Wilson looks a lot like one of those, smooth separators like a Calvin Ridley or like a CeeDee Lamb, kind of in that Stephon Diggs type mold where they're a little bit, frailer, but they're, very clean. They have good routes, some yak ability. And if he doesn't, go top 10, I think that he probably falls into, in terms of gold wide receivers that have that build, he falls into the Jerry Jeudy, Will Fuller, Sidney Rice type bucket. But those long, wiry guys that have, top end speed and are still solid, guys, like Will Fuller, who has had, his fair share of, really good fantasy seasons. Same with Sidney Rice. So solid, but he does get, if he gets top 10 draft capital, like he did in this update, he gets moved up to, that elite, pretty much can't miss type tier. If he does fall outside the top 10, which it seems like it's probably more likely he falls outside of the top 10 than doesn't right now, being projected at 10. If that happens, I'll probably move him to wide receiver 3 and I'll bump Drake London to wide receiver 2 because they'll be in the same tier at that point. And that's just because I think that if, Garrett Wilson and London have similar, hit rates in terms of top 24 seasons, I do think that Drake London has a little bit of a higher ceiling. He has some Mike Evans to his game where he could just be, a dominant X wide receiver with that, really high upside. Whereas Garrett Wilson could, if he doesn't go top 10, could just be, kind of a perennial top 24, Tyler Lockett, Will Fuller type guy. The next biggest riser on this list is James Cook. And I would say the biggest thing for a guy like James Cook or any of these running backs at the end of, those fringe, round 3, round 4 guys like Rachaad White, Zamir White, James Cook, like we said, Tyler Algier. The best thing they can hope for is day 2 draft capital. And I was actually really surprised when I, made the running back model that I didn't find there was a huge difference between round 2 and round 3 draft capital, right? Round 2 running backs average 9.39 points per game in their first 3 seasons, whereas round 3 running backs average 9.11. So we're talking, 0.39 to 0.11 isn't a really big drop off. It's that drop off from round 3 to round 4, right? So day 2 to day 3 is a killer for these running backs. They go from 9.11 points per game to 5.58. So that's a massive drop off, almost cutting your expected points per game in your first 3 years in half. And with this new update, James Cook gets bumped from round 4, pick 106, all the way to round 3, pick 80. So that bumped him from bronze tier, which hit top 12 seasons at a 7% rate, to silver, which hit top 12 seasons at a 25% rate. And I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not super in love with his profile. This is a flat running back class where kind of after that top 3 to 4, you can kind of have whoever you want. I will just say that I think that Dalvin Cook's a better bet than a lot of those other fringe guys, just because if he gets day 2 draft capital, that's really all you need. Like round 3 James Cook versus, like round 4 Tyler Algier, or, a round 4. I'm trying to think of other, fringe guys like round 4 Brian Robinson. I'd take James Cook there. I just think that James Cook is a really good bet to get round 3 draft capital, where his profile doesn't look that great, but I think that teams are going to like that. One, he's Dalvin Cook's brother, which is like kind of weird, but again, I think that just having that like pedigree or whatever is going to move him into the 3rd round. Same thing with like being from a big school like Georgia. So I think a lot of NFL teams will talk themselves into drafting James Cook a little bit higher than he should go, but just because of how important draft capital is and how, after the top 3 running backs, nothing else really stands out a ton. I think James Cook, is pretty easily in that RB 6 to 7 range for me if he goes in that round 3 spot. Now, again, I'm not in love with his profile, but I think that he does have, some bright spots where, he played at the SEC. He put up a solid 8.71 RAS grade. He ran a 4.42. He's also an early declare. He's like decent in the passing game. My only biggest concern for him is that he's 5'11", 199, so he is undersized, which means I don't think his ceiling is anything crazy. He's probably, he does feel like a Devin Singletary, like a Zach Moss, just kind of like a committee back, which is fine, for RB6, RB7 in this class, who's likely, a running back you can draft in like the early 3rd of a rookie draft. But I'm just saying, keep an eye on him. If he stays in silver, he'll be a guy that I'll be pushing up into that RB6, RB7 range. All right, our last riser on this list is George Pickens, and he went from an 8.41 unofficial relative athletic score. Remember, relative athletic score, it takes into account, a prospect's size, speed, agility, explosion, gives like a grade out of 10 for them, just based on their athleticism in terms of wide receivers, what percentile. And he went from an 8.41 unofficial right after the combine, like a day or two after, to a 9.34, which, brings him from, kind of like a B plus, A minus tier of, RAS to, an A plus. 9.34 is really, really good. Now, I will say, athleticism isn't enough of an input in the model. It shouldn't be, because you don't want to move up guys like Brashad Perriman and Kevin White, but it's enough so that he gets a little bit of boost within the gold tier, and it solidifies, in my mind at least, his high upside, where he is this X-type wide receiver, at least perimeter wide receiver. And if you now give him early declare and you give him uber athleticism, that has a lot of upside, wrapped in it. Same with, being an early breakout type guy, where as a freshman, he was really good. He has, I think, one of the widest range of outcomes, where he could be Terrace Marshall, or he could be, like an A.J. Brown, early declare guy, pretty good athleticism, goes 2nd round, gets a little bit slept on, and, performs in the NFL. Now, those were really the only guys that got, significant bumps up. So I want to talk about a guy who got a significant downgrade in the model, and that's David Bell. Now, I know we talked earlier that round 2 to round 3 in terms of running backs isn't a big drop-off at all. For wide receivers, it is. And David Bell went from 2nd round, 57th overall, to 3rd round, 73rd overall, which is a pretty good ding on his profile. He went from, an alpha gold type profile, which hit, at a 45% rate in terms of top 24 seasons, to silver, which hit top 24 seasons at a 25% rate. So a pretty good downgrade. And David Bell, he has a really good profile on paper. And I know a lot of analytics guys, my fellow nerds, are going to be out there really liking David Bell. Just he has some real red flags where I think that we kind of need to see and be like, man, like maybe we need to take a second look here and just kind of take a step back and breathe for a second on David Bell, because, again, his numbers are fine. It's the film that's a really big red flag. And it's not the film like I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, I don't see, how this guy, I don't see how this guy is a good wide receiver at the next level. I don't have those skills, but I lean on draft capital and I lean on Lance Zierlein. Right now, the NFL Industrial Complex, according to Grind the Mocks, has him at wide receiver 10 in projected draft capital. And Lance Zierlein, when he did his prospect grades, he has him now at wide receiver 14. So a guy, I think a lot of analytics guys want to pump into their top 5 or top 6 in terms of their wide receivers. It's just tough for me to look past scouts not even seeing him as a top 10 wide receiver in this class. So it's just tough to ignore that for me. I think for me, I'll still be a little bit higher than that. I'll probably have him in that wide receiver, 8 to 9 range if round 3 draft capital holds. If he does sneak into round 2, then he's likely, a top 6 guy for me. So it does just come down to whether he goes round 2 or if he falls a little bit. If he does fall, it's going to be tough, right? We just need, if the NFL takes him in round 2, then at that point you can say, NFL has him, as like wide receiver 7, 8, 9, which is a lot prettier than going round 3. So I think it's just something to keep an eye on. If he does fall in the NFL draft, it does seem like a little bit of a Tyler Johnson scenario where I wouldn't just, lean on his analytics and just ignore, just say, the NFL got that one wrong. Now that's going to do it for us today, fellas. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you get down below, subscribe, leave a like. We got some bangers coming up here. I think this video is coming out Sunday. Actually, I don't even know what video is going to come out tomorrow. Probably like a stream or something, but we're going to be trying to upload daily videos for the month of April because it's the NFL draft month. So stay along for the ride, subscribe, leave a like, and as always, I will see you in the next one.
Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena for misdemeanors. Dreamer, held back asses low.